Welcome. My name is Kylie Hanish, and I'm the founder of Return to Zero Hope. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. I'm so pleased to have with us Kristen Rademacher, and she will be talking about living a life without children, but still finding joy and hope and purpose. So I am pleased to introduce her today. Kristen lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, with a master's degree in education and professional coaching certification. She works as an academic coach for college students. Kristen loves writing and published a memoir in 2020. From the Lake House, A Mother's Odyssey of Love and Loss is an intimate exploration of the unique grief she faced when her baby was stillborn. The book also explores the healing Kristen experienced as she grappled to rebuild her life in the wake of losing her dream of motherhood. Her book has been described as achingly honest, beautifully written, and poignant. So I read this book and I just devoured it in like a weekend. So it was really good. I highly encourage you to read it. We're doing a giveaway of the book right now. So if you're interested in winning a copy of Kristen's book, you can find that on our Instagram page. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Kristen and let her take it from here.
All right. Well, thank you, Kylie. Thanks for giving me the time and space to share my story. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. And thank you to all the work you all do at Return to Zero Hope. So I'm going to share my screen and just dive in. So as Kylie said, I am Kristen Rademacher, and I'm the author of a book. I also work with college students, and I want to start by just sharing with you the particulars of my story, and then I'll talk you through how I moved through all the stages of grief into this new life that I'm living now. So I was 39 years old when I delivered a full-term stillborn baby girl. I named her Carly. This was almost 20 years ago. I had moved to North Carolina shortly before 2004 in order to be in this relationship with the father of Carly. Got pregnant pretty soon thereafter, had a very healthy pregnancy. There was nothing unusual about the pregnancy, nothing alarming, and woke up I was 41 weeks pregnant, so I was a little bit overdue. Woke up one morning to realize that I hadn't felt my baby moving. Went in to have an emergency ultrasound and discovered that her heart had stopped beating. So, and I'll talk more about that initial shock that I felt. So had to deliver her, and that was traumatic. Got pregnant again. 6 months later, I miscarried at the end of my first trimester. So within 6 months, I had these two back-to-back intense losses. The relationship I was in with Carly's father was, and I write about this quite a bit in my book, it was starting to get wobbly as the pregnancy progressed. And in the wake of our two losses, we just did not survive it. And we separated about 2 months after the pregnancy, after the miscarriage. And by the time I was at the first year anniversary of Carly's death, I was 40 years old. I was single again. And this long held vision of my life that I'd seen for myself, to be a parent, to have children, to be a mother, to be married, all of that was gone in a short period of time. So it was a very, it felt like the earth.
It looks like your Folk command bar is not linked to your Amazon account.
Sorry.
Please use the Folk Connect app to sign in with Amazon.
Sorry, my TV is making a noise. So it just felt like the rug got torn out from underneath me. So there I was with this painful realization that I was not going to become a mother, the one thing that I really was certain that I wanted to be. And I knew that unless there was some miracle, like if I met someone else shortly thereafter, and I didn't even want to. And if I got pregnant again, which at that point I didn't want to, I knew motherhood was off the table. And that led me to some very difficult questions, which is who will I be? If I'm not going to become a mother, then who am I going to be? I hadn't thought of myself as any other way. And if I'm not going to be a mother, what is my life going to look like if motherhood is not in the picture? So I remember at the time, I thought I was the only person on the planet who had faced these sorts of questions. And I've come to find out later, as I started poking around the internet, that there's actually quite a large number of women who are in the same position as well, coming to the end of their fertility years and have not had children. So I recently discovered this model. It's called the pushing on theory of maternal bereavement. I discovered this way after the fact when I lost my baby. And I really think it describes the typical stages, it beautifully describes the typical stages that women go through when they have experienced perinatal loss. And I'm going to use this model as a way to talk through how I moved through grief to acceptance of my loss to a reimagined life. I think this model also works really well for women who have lost the dream of motherhood as well. So I'm going to sort of collapse it into a broader model. So I will just start talking through it. So the first stage of this model is this hopeful stage, this sort of like hopeful anticipation. It's experiencing the pregnancy or also just wanting to have children. And I like to think of it as just nesting, maybe getting ready to meet your baby. I certainly felt that way when I was pregnant, fantasizing about what is this baby going to be like? What is my life going to be like? Preparing my life, getting all the accoutrements to have a baby. So it's a very forward, hopeful look into the future. As my pregnancy progressed, and I think this is true for a lot of women, the abstraction of being pregnant, which sort of was what it felt like for me in those early months when I didn't really look any different, started to become concrete as I got larger, as I started to feel my baby move. It just felt like this magical time for me. She became real. I got to know the rhythms of her movements and really started to bond with her. And I think that's really common for women everywhere. I think this first stage also includes what I like to think of as building one's tribe, socializing in circles that often include mothers or other pregnant women. For me, my situation was a little bit unique because I had just moved to North Carolina to be in this relationship and had not yet formed a close circle of friends. But I just assumed that as soon as my baby was born, all these doors would open up to me and I would soon be best friends with lots of other mothers and I would have all sorts of connections. So I was imagining this future tribe that had yet to be formed. So the second stage of this model is that initial loss, that initial sort of gut punch when one loses the baby, when I lost my baby. And this comes with just a flood of raw emotions. There's feelings of shock. I certainly felt that, feelings of numbness. It's complicated by the having to go through childbirth. So for me, when I think back to the discovery that my baby's heart stopped beating, I was given the option of being admitted into the hospital that very moment to start the induction of labor, or to go home and kind of get my arms around it and then come back, which is what I chose to do. So it was just an incredibly surreal time for me. And the delivery, the actual delivery, once it started to happen, felt like this combination of this sacred experience and this painful experience and this surreal experience. I had assumed I was having a boy and ended up having a girl. So there was this moment of great joy when I delivered her and I was holding my daughter. But of course, I didn't go home with her. So just lots of raw grief. It's complicated by the fact that you're also going through childbirth recovery. I remember getting home and I started to lactate and my hormones were raging, and it just felt like the earth beneath me had been removed. So that was my experience when I first lost the baby. And I imagine for women who are trying to get pregnant and unable to, there's this ongoing disappointment when one gets their period, or when failed fertility tests, or just coming to terms with the fact that you've reached the end of your childbearing years. So this third phase is the grieving phase. So I like to think of the second phase as just this plummet into this pit. And then the third phase of grieving is just sort of like you're settled into the pit. You have to hang out in there for a while. And I think grief is a really universal experience. We all go through it at one time or another. But the grief of a baby, the grief of losing a baby, the grief of losing the vision of motherhood is complicated for several reasons. And here's some of them. It can feel like a disenfranchised grief, this feeling that the intensity of your feelings are not valid, that you shouldn't be having these extreme reactions to someone that you didn't live, or to the idea of having a baby and you were not able to get pregnant. I think some people cannot relate to the feelings that women have about child death and wanting to get pregnant. So it can end up feeling like it's this really isolated experience, that no one else can understand what you're going through. There are also a whole host of uncomfortable feelings that can accompany the grief. I felt all of these in lots of ways. Feelings of guilt. For me, I felt like my body had failed, that it was doing everything right, and at the last minute, something went wrong. I felt guilty that my one role as a mother was to protect my baby and, bring her into the world, and I was not able to do that. So guilt complicates the grief. There's oftentimes feelings of shame, and this is something that I really felt for a long time, and it took me a long time to kind of understand why shame was part of the mix for me. And I think the metaphor that comes to mind for me is this game of musical chairs, that game where everyone's walking around a circle of chairs and the music is playing, and when it stops, everyone scrambles for a chair, but there's not enough for everybody. And so I felt like that was me. I felt like the music stopped and I didn't get a chair. And I was kind of ushered out, and just felt like I was ushered out because I'd really messed up my life. I'd reached age 40 and I had not gotten married. I had not had a successful relationship. I had not had a baby, and that clearly my life was a result of lots of mistakes that I had made, and who would want to be associated with me. So that was not a fun feeling that I coped with while I was grieving. And of course, there's also feelings of envy, just wanting to be the woman I felt who had children, who had been married. It was really hard for me to hear the perfectly normal kvetching women would share about having late nights because their baby was up, or being frustrated with their husband. And I would feel like, you have so much and I don't have anything. And those are just really uncomfortable feelings to cope with. Another reason the grief can be complicated is the uncomfortable questions we have to face. These have become much easier to me as I've aged, but certainly in the beginning, when I was asked if I had a child, it just felt like there's no good answer here. No matter what I say, it's going to be painful for me, or it's going to be painful for the person who asked. So of course, the simple answer would be, no, I don't have any children, but I had a child and she didn't live. And I don't want to make someone else feel uncomfortable by sharing that with them. But then I would feel guilty that I was dishonoring my daughter by saying, no, I don't have any children. So that's one example of the kinds of questions that I was faced that was hard. And I think there's other questions that women can face as well, like, have you thought about adoption, or have you thought about foster care, and all those kinds of personal questions that just tend to make someone, can just be triggering. So it's not just the death of a baby that makes the grief so painful, but it's also the death of the dreams, the long-term dreams and the short-term dreams of not having that particular child, or the dreams of not being able to have any children at all. I remember in those early days, I would grieve the reality that I would not experience first steps of my child, first words, first days of school, graduations, all those landmark events that come with watching a life unfold. I also felt sad that I was not able to bring grandchildren, any more grandchildren into my parents' lives, and was not able to bring cousins or a cousin into the lives of my nieces and nephews, and realize that not only am I not going to be a parent, but I'm also not going to be a grandparent. So these long-term dreams that are associated with having children also die. So that is another reason why the loss is complicated. Also, there's this anxiety about an unknown future. I just felt like I was facing this existential black hole. I couldn't imagine what my life was going to be like. I felt like I had lost so much in such a short period of time. And I didn't have a model for how to go forward. So that just brought up all kinds of anxious feelings. I remember also feeling in those early days, this anxiety that without any children, as I age, who's going to watch out for me? Who's going to make sure that I'm okay and all my needs are getting met? So that is another complicated piece of the grieving process. And then there's the death of a wish for identity. So I want to talk a little bit more about that, because I think I really grappled with this, and I think this is a big issue for women who want to have children and who are unable to do so. So one of the reasons why the loss of identity is so painful is because it really just shakes up one's sense of self. If for many women, there's such a biological pull to have children, and to not be able to fulfill that biological pull can just be really disorienting and really devastating. To me, it felt like I was asked to play this whole new role, and I was not given the script. There was no plot line. It just felt like, who am I if I'm not going to be a mother? So that was one piece of my kind of identity crisis. Another piece that was just real for me was how my social circles changed and my friendships changed. I felt like I was a stranger in a strange land for a long time. Part of that was likely because I was still new-ish to the Chapel Hill area when I got here, but I don't know how different it would have been if I had this loss back in where I'd been living originally. One of the reasons it was hard for me was because I thought, well, who's my new tribe going to be? I don't want to hang out with women with young children, because for obvious reasons, that was just too triggering and too painful for me. So I felt like this huge demographic just got taken off the table of people that I would want to spend time with and get to know, but I couldn't figure out who was going to replace that. I also felt a little bit like a social pariah, like people are not going to want to become friends with me because I've lost so much in such a short period of time. Maybe my grief is contagious. Maybe, they won't be able to handle all the issues that I was going through at the time. I've come to find out later that I'm not the only one who's felt that way, that this idea of being a social pariah after losing a child is not that uncommon. And in actuality, some friendships do change because of that. That was certainly true for me. I was really lucky that most of my friendships really deepened, and just really grateful for the support that I was given. But some friendships didn't make it. We just drifted apart. I think the enormity of the grief that I felt after losing a baby, and that a woman in general can feel after losing a baby, is just sometimes a lot for others to handle, and the friendship just kind of dies a natural death. So that can mess up your sense of identity. there's also this unfortunate collection of negative associations that women who are older and childless have that I don't think men have. This idea that we're old maids, or we're old hags, or the crazy cat lady. So I just remember, for me, in 1 year's time, I went from feeling like I was youthful, I was carrying life, I was about to deliver life, and then that was all taken away, and I was 180 degrees different. I was now this older, childless, single woman, and all the negative associations that came with that really kind of plagued me for a long time. Oops, the slide went too quickly. The last thing I wanted to say on that slide was the change in your primary relationship. Perinatal loss, infant loss, huge strain on relationships. As I mentioned, my relationship was already in a not great place. We were probably not going to make it, even had we not had these losses, but it really kind of blew up the relationship pretty quickly thereafter. So that, again, is a reason why one's sense of identity can really be shaken up. For me, I was, again, like, suddenly I was single, and I had not been single for several years. So there was so much to cope with at that beginning stage. So this next stage is, I like to think of it as you're in the bottom of the pit of grief, but you're looking up and you see the light and you start to find ways to climb out of it. This is sort of energy and effort made towards healing. So I want to share with you some of the things that I did to help cope and heal. Some of it was really intentional, and some of it just sort of happened without my planning it. So the first thing is really coming to terms with the loss, accepting it, understanding that it's not going to change. There's no do-over. This is what happened. This is the reality. But it's not forgetting the loss, and it's not this removal of the sorrow that comes with it, but it's really finding a way to live with the sorrow while also making room for new things in one's life. So that was an important step for me. I also sought help, which I think is super important. I started working with a therapist soon after losing Carly, and that was really important for me because I had someone who didn't know me personally, but I was given the space to really say whatever it is that I needed to say. I didn't have to filter my feelings. I didn't have to monitor myself. I didn't have to try to protect his feelings because he didn't know me. And that helped me just to start to articulate what I was going through. I didn't join a support group, but I did make a really special connection with a woman that I met on this online forum through another organization, not too dissimilar from Return to Zero. It's called the Miss Foundation. And we met again on this online forum. She had delivered a stillborn baby, full term, about a month after I did. And so we had this incredibly similar experience at about the same time. And we just started writing letters to each other just about every day for a good 6 months or more, sometimes more than once a day. And her name is Jennifer. That friendship that I formed with Jennifer was one of the most important sources of healing for me. I think this is why support groups are so important. It really normalized the feelings. It helped me to feel like I wasn't crazy, that someone else was understanding what I was feeling, because she was in fact going through the same thing at the same time. I think looking back, it was really like the antidote to feeling like my grief was disenfranchised. So that was really key for me. I also started writing in a journal, which is not something that was terribly new for me, but I started writing in a journal daily, almost as if my life depended on it. And similar to talking to my therapist, my journal became a place where I could just put all my feelings out there on the page and see them. And somehow seeing them in writing helped me to not be quite so overwhelmed by the magnitude of the feelings. It helped me to start to relate to them differently and helped me to really understand what was happening to me. So that was something that I started to do. It was not a conscious decision I made to journal and sort of in order to heal, but it is what indeed happened to me. I also started to make efforts to just re-engage with my life. I think for anyone who's been in the pits of grief, kind of everything just stops. So I started to re-engage again, little things like doing errands, saying hello to neighbors, going to the grocery store, socializing with people at work really helped me to feel like, okay, I'm sort of coming back to life again. But I also started to do some new things. One of the early new things that I became obsessed with was birds. And part of that was I had believed that my daughter Carly was this spiritual being near me. And I can go on and on about that, but I thought she's nearby and she's maybe in the animal world, and I just got obsessed with birds. But I think that obsession, that effort I made to learn about birds and learn their names and learn their sort of migration patterns gave my brain something new to do, something new to think about, created new neural pathways, and that ended up being an important part of my healing process as well. My slide's not going forward. There it is. I also made efforts to stay connected to Carly. As I mentioned, I imagined her as a spiritual being. I thought really clearly, I'm not going to be a mother to this child in the flesh, but I'm going to be a mother to her in this different way. So I started writing letters to her. That was one way I used my journal a lot. And that felt like I was creating this other kind of relationship with her. And I still do that to this day. I also remember, as an example, that first spring after she died, this is about 4 months after she died. Spring in North Carolina is just particularly beautiful. There's just all these shades of green that come out, and flowers are budding on trees and coming out of the earth, and it's just beautiful. And I thought, I'm gonna make an intention to experience spring in a way that I haven't before. I'm going to try to experience it as if I'm doing it for her through these new eyes. So that's an example of what I did that helped me to feel like I didn't lose everything. I'm still with her in these alternative ways. I also made effort to connect to something larger than myself, and that literally meant remembering or recognizing that I was and am part of a large community of women, past, present, and future, who have lost a child or who are childless. And I'm not alone in that. And while the grief I was feeling was unique to me and to my personal circumstances, there is a universality to it. And that really helped me to feel like I was just not alone in my grief. I also worked to just cultivate a hopeful mindset. I think being hopeful is really emotionally and mentally healthy. This, again, was not something I did mindfully, but looking back, I can see that I was in small ways hoping for little things like a good day, or something would make me smile, or I'd be able to make someone laugh on any given day. And those small acts of hope, I think, really helped to push me more towards the light. And then finally, I worked to expand my social circles, which was a big deal for me, again, because I was new, and I really kind of got strategic about it. I remember early on, I would think, by Wednesday of the week, I am going to make sure, that was my deadline, to reach out and to make one social plan with at least one person. And that really worked. It helped me to start meeting people and helped me to feel like I, again, am part of the community and I have something to give and I have something to offer. So the last stage is, I think, just beautiful. And it's one of the reasons why I really like this model. It's this idea that you have transcended and are now living a changed life despite the pain and despite the grief. So if we go back to that pit metaphor, this is, you're out of the pit, you've made your way out of the pit and you've survived. But more than that, you've transformed and you are now thriving in these new ways. So I want to start by just sort of talking through some of the general features of what this phase can look like. And then I will shift it and talk about what that has looked like for me personally. So living a changed life can mean tapping into the gifts of grief. when you lose something, as many of you know, it can be so devastating, but the grief can bring this greater compassion, this greater appreciation for life, this just much easier to feel grateful, because for me, I felt like I had lost so much. So anything positive felt like just glorious to me. So that has really stayed with me. Realignment of values. There is nothing like a major traumatic life event to shake things up. And my life was totally shaken up by that as well. It almost forced me, and I think it forces many people, to really consider, like, what is important to me? Who are the people I want to be with? What are the things I want to do with my life right now? So that is a really special opportunity that not everyone gets to have, to really think about, how do I want to live in some different ways? I think I just love this third point here. In this transcendent phase is really recognizing, despite not having children, despite bearing the pain of the loss, that there are so many gifts that you have, and that you have worth, and you have important contributions to make to the community and to your communities, that you are strong and resilient, and you've not only survived, but you've thrived. So I think this is one of the real gifts of this phase, is being able to look back and see, just sort of celebrate who you are and who you've become. Keeps not going to my next point. Well, I'll just keep going forward then. So let me take you back to where I was 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, when I was at that phase where I was really coping and healing and trying to reimagine what my life would be like. And ironically, during this time in my life, I was getting trained as a life coach. And I was learning the value of asking open-ended questions and provocative questions. So I started to ask myself some questions that really helped me to think about how I wanted to go forward. So here's some of those questions. What brings me a sense of purpose and meaning? What fulfills me? What are the things that really resonate with me? What are the ways that I feel most happy and most content and most alive? And I knew that if I could start to identify that, I could really start to shift my life into directions that would be important to me. And the other question is, where can I funnel my love? I think for those of you who've lost a baby, or who are yearning to have a baby and have not been able to do so, there's this sort of ache, this love that you have and you want to give. And so starting to think about, for me, where is this love gonna go? It has to go somewhere. Where is it gonna go? Really helped me. So here I am. I'm 57 years old. I do not have children. That was not my choice, but that is my reality. And I can say with just joy that I am a content person. And I've made that a choice to become a content person. And I, of course, wish that Carly were here with me. She would be an 18-year-old young woman right now, on the verge of graduating from high school and embarking on this new chapter in her life. And I would have loved to have been a part of that journey for her and helped to launch her off into the next phase. And of course, that didn't happen. She's not here with me, but I can see how her absence has really brought transcendence to my life. And it's not at all a perfect life, but it's a life where I feel like I've gotten some real gifts from her absence, and some real gifts from the loss of her, and from having to reimagine my life. So I want to share them with you. So as Kylie said, I've published a memoir, and the path to that is a little bit interesting. As I said, I journaled a ton in those early days, and about 18 months after Carly died. And so there I was on my own again and trying to rebuild my life. I decided to take a writing class that was offered in my community art center. And turns out that the teacher of the class was a published author. She had written a memoir about her experience losing a baby. And it was actually one of the first books that I had read after I lost Carly. And I didn't know it was her, and I didn't know she was in the same town as me, but there she was leading this class. And that led to her invitation to me to join this new private writing group that she was forming. And I can say without a doubt that that writing group really was a huge piece of my healing process and really changed my life. I was with this group of women for a chunk of time, just years, and we were all sharing our stories with each other. And that was really the beginning of where I started to see this is part of my new tribe, women of all ages sharing all kinds of experiences. And it was in this group that I was given sort of like the safety and the space to tell my entire story and write it. And it became clear over time that there was a memoir starting to take shape. So I published the memoir almost 2 years ago. And despite thinking I would have a nervous breakdown publishing it, I didn't. And one of the hopes I had in publishing the memoir was that I would be able to reach other women and hopefully be helpful to them in some way. And that has proven to be true. So that has very much felt like a birth of some kind. Another way my life has been transformed by my loss is just this blossoming of a spiritual life. Before Carly, I had no spiritual orientation at all, just wasn't even on my mind. And then I think what happens to me is what happened to me is what happens to many people after they've lost something, as I just started searching for some new ways to feel comforted and to feel peaceful and just to sort of make meaning of my life and life in general, and started walking down several paths and followed a trail that ultimately led me to what has now become my spiritual home. And it's become one of the most important pieces of my life and has really redirected me and brings me, has just been a real anchor in my life. And none of that would likely have happened had I not lost Carly. I also discovered the love of the outdoors and travel. I was, again, in those early days, I got really into birds and being outside, and that really just evolved into just wanting to be outside much more. When I travel now, it tends to be to national parks or to mountains, and I feel most sort of satisfied when I'm spending time outdoors. It's where I can take myself if I need to reset or recharge or feel inspired, and just to be in the beauty of the earth, despite how sometimes it feels like our world is such a mess. Being outside reminds me that there's still lots of beauty, and that's just been this ongoing source of fulfillment for me. And that started with my paying attention to birds as I was trying to find a way to connect with my daughter. There's also been lots of opportunities for me to grow professionally. And when I think back to my life as a little girl, I was a child of the 70s. I did not have any sort of articulated professional plan at all. And I work with college students now, and I can tell you that is not the life of most college students. They are much more directed than I ever was. So because I ended up not having any children, I really kind of threw myself into my professional life and have benefited from the opportunities that came my way. As Kylie said, I'm an academic coach at a big university in North Carolina, and through a series of sort of good luck and good timing, I played a role in really forming the academic coaching model that has now been adopted by the department that I work in. And I've also played a role in bringing this model to the university at large. My colleague and I have written a training program, and we use it to train hundreds of staff and faculty at our university, and we've taken our training to national conferences, and it has spawned enough interest that we've just signed a book contract. So we'll all have another book coming out in a month on, not in a month, in a year, on academic coaching. So when I think back to when I was just scribbling in my journal and how writing has really evolved for me in lots of different ways, I'm just kind of amazed at the mystery of it all, and so grateful that I've gotten these opportunities to grow professionally as well. And then finally, I have recognized that my yearning to mother does not have to be limited to children of my own. I'm grateful that I have been in the lives of my nieces and nephews and have been a part of their development, and watching them grow up through the years has felt like a real gift and a blessing to me. I, again, work with college students, and I think over the years, I've probably coached thousands of college students. Some of them will work with me throughout their entire 4 years at the university, and it just feels like such a privilege to watch them develop and to be a part of the conversations that they're kind of having with themselves as they're figuring out who they want to be, how they want to form their lives after college, and just seeing them grow over the years has been just a real source of pleasure for me. And I'm not quite the crazy cat lady, but it is good to be one of my cats. They are the recipient of lots of affection that I can give them, and it makes them happy, and in turn that makes me happy. I also love and nurture my significant other. We have been creating this new middle-aged relationship and really figuring out how we want to define that for ourselves, and have spent the last 2 years working on this big renovation project. And before too long, I'll be moving out of my house here and living in this new house with my significant other. And that really just feels like a labor of love, but again, a real clear way that I have been able to fulfill my desire to love and nurture. And so while these are highlights of my personal life, I'm sharing them because I think they really illustrate how loss can be transformed, and can be transformative in general. Losing a baby and losing the dream of motherhood can really be devastating, but transformation can happen. It happened to me. There's just a little bit of mystery to it, I think. And so my hope is that for women who are in the grieving process, that they will stay hopeful, and that they will come to know that their story has not been taken away, that it's just, it's not finished, it's just being rewritten, and that they can be the authors of how they imagine their life going forward. So I'm going to skip that. I was going to read a passage from my book, but we are just at the 45-minute mark. So I think I will end there and just say thank you so much for your attention and for being with me this afternoon. And I've left some contact information up there. If anyone is so inclined to reach out, I'd be happy to respond. And I will unshare my screen right now and hopefully see Kylie.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
You're so welcome.
That was beautiful.
So welcome. I'm happy to share it. I'm really happy to share it. And I think I'm in this unique position because I'm almost 20 years out. So I have I have the vantage point of looking and seeing, how did I do that? How did I work through that? And how do I make sense of it? And how do I kind of honor the loss and really view it as this larger piece of my whole life and see how it's impacted me in lots of ways. So yeah, happy to share it.